Hello and welcome to Bad Boy Cinema. I'm your host, Rick Reel, and this week we will be discussing Furiosa, Mad Max Saga, directed by George M., released in 2024, with a runtime of 148 minutes. Now, this film is a prequel to Mad Max Fury Road, which we discussed last week. So if you are just tuning in for Furiosa, maybe check out the discussion on Mad Max Fury Road. Not that I think you need to necessarily to enjoy the discussion or even enjoy the film, but it is, I think, meant to be watched, with that context in mind, right? We exist within the context, and this movie is certainly no different from that. Uh, so it's starring Anya Taylor-Joy, Chris Hemsworth, Tom Burke, and Alia Brown. Alia? That's okay. With a budget, a budget of 168 million, and it made in the box office 172.8 million, which is pretty bad. This movie really bombed. Unfortunately, I think it shouldn't have. I think it's really great. I think it's probably my favorite. It might be my favorite movie of this year so far. Um, we love Fury Road, right? Um, we yeah. So how do we go into this, right? How do we talk about Furiosa? I think structurally the movie, right? You see the movie and why did it fail? Why did it fail? Let's go at that angle, right? Why did the movie fail? Probably because of woke. No, I'm just kidding. Kind of, not really. So I think you see this movie and you go, okay, it's a prequel about Furiosa because that's the name, and that's a fair assumption to make, right? And that is also, technically speaking, not incorrect. Um, but like, okay, so you know how in the previous episode I talked about Mad Max Fury Road, is that it starts out like tricking you into thinking it's about Mad Max, and then it's really more about Furiosa, and even then it's really more about ideals and themes, right? It's not really about the characters at all, and if it's not about if it is about a character, and I would argue it's not, but if it is, Fury Road's about Furiosa, and I think the same can be applied to the Furiosa film, not to be confused with the character, or maybe intentionally confusing. I mean, George M., man, close personal friend of Hideo Kojima, I guess. I think Hideo Kojima was like on set, just like watching. I remember him posting stuff about the movie on his Instagram, just like posting like videos of him like just hanging out in the desert, which does seem like a good time if you're not there for work and you're just there to kind of hang out with your buddy. I love hanging out in the desert and just doing stuff, making movies in the desert. Seems like a fun time. Uh, like how cool is it to just have a giant sandbox in your backyard? You're just like, I'm just gonna shoot movies in this giant sandbox where everything sucks, and that's just the setting. Is that this place is a dump. Um, but Fury Road, I think, tricks you into thinking that it is a prequel about Furiosa, which again is not technically speaking incorrect. Also, spoilers for the movie, but I don't think the spoilers really matter, right? It's a prequel, so if you haven't seen either of these movies, then stop listening to the podcast. This will be back whenever you want. But and I'd be very curious, if anybody reach out to me, right? If you've seen only Furiosa and you haven't seen Mad Max Fury Road, I would love to hear your opinion on the film. So reach out to me the email is rick.reel at badboycinema at gmail or dot badboycinema at gmail.com. It will be in the description of the episode, the show notes, whatever you want to call it. But Furiosa is not really about Furiosa, in my opinion. But it's not really about themes either. Arguably, and we'll get to it, Furiosa, a Mad Max saga, is actually kind of more about Mad Max than it is about Furiosa. And Mad Max is not in the. I mean, technically he cameos in like one shot where he's just like looking at shit happening, but outside of that, Mad Max isn't in the movie at all. So I think Furiosa is, you know, more about Mad Max. Maybe the character, maybe the franchise, probably the character. It's about a lot of other things, but we'll get to that. So why did the movie fail? Right? It's the feminine. People are like looking at this as about Furiosa, and I think it's not true, and not that it's bad. Like this isn't like a girl boss movie by any means. Like Furiosa was pretty cool in 2015 in Fury Road, and I think the character in the Furiosa prequel movie still just as cool. But a lot of the movie takes place with the character as a child, which I think might be a hard selling point. You're like, what do you mean you spent 30 minutes with this character as a kid? 30 minutes. I'm rough estimate, 30-ish minutes, maybe 40 of the movie's runtime with the character being a child. And that kind of sucks because a child in the Mad Max world can't really do a whole lot. You know what I mean? Like it can't be badass. Like surely you would think that this movie can't really be as much of an action film as the previous movie if that's why you wanted to see, Fury Road. If the movie's about this character and it opens with her as a child being kidnapped, like how much action can there really be with that chunk, especially if it takes up a good part of the movie, like, roughly 30, 40 minutes. And I think if they just named the movie something else, and I don't know what, but I think it really just is a problem with the title of the film being like about Furiosa, because like you see Fury Road and you're like, okay, like she's cool, but I don't necessarily really want to know anything about how she got here, right? Like she's cool, she's badass, that's great. Like I don't need a movie where you know I don't care, right? I mean, maybe that's just me. Maybe I'm like, I don't really give a shit about Furiosa as a character. And I think if you were to talk to George M., right? If you were to talk to him and say, hey, like, these are my thoughts. I don't care about Furiosa at all. And he'd be like, I think he would say he doesn't care either. I genuinely, I mean, not that he doesn't care. He obviously wrote the movie, but I think he would say, well, yeah, but that's not the point of this. And I don't know if it was always going to be called Furiosa or if this was like a studio note. Someone was like trying to make it more appealing by making it about this character that people theoretically liked. But the movie, again, while it does have the plot elements of how Furiosa went from kidnapped child in the Green Place to, you know, literally from that to the very end of the movie where she's rescuing the brides and we're back into the Fury Road timeline, right? I mean, talking about timelines like this is multiverse shit, but you know what I mean. Like that, the movie ends basically roughly exactly as Fury Road begins, more or less. That's the text of the film. So spoilers for Furiosa. I haven't really said anything particularly insightful yet, right? Because how again, you know where the character's going, you know where it started, you know where it's going. You get that. So you can fill in the dots with your head on how this character got from point A to point B. And that is admittedly, not very interesting. So why do I love this movie so much? And I imagine people listening to this probably haven't actually listened or watched Furiosa, so they don't know maybe where I'm going with this. But I think for those who have, will know that the real star of the movie, and arguably the character with the most complete arc, the most complete story, probably the most lines in the movie, because like Furiosa herself doesn't really say a whole lot in the movie because she deliberately chooses to be mute for a lot of it. And that's fine. There's a lot of action where she's, I don't want to shit on the script. I'm not shitting on the script. Like, it makes sense because I think the movie, as it was created, was not meant to be necessarily an origin story for Furiosa, though it certainly is that from like just if you were to describe what happens about the protagonist of the movie on paper, that is what it is. But that's not really what the movie's up to. You know what I mean? Because what the movie is really up to is about exploring, I think, the world, sort of, the world building, the lore from Fury Road. I mean, obviously there's other Mad Max films, but like, exploring the political stuff, the textural stuff from Fury Road with the warlords and, Citadel, Gastown, Bullet Farm, all that stuff. Exploring that with a character that exhibits a lot of the traits of Mad Max himself, right? Max Rock Rocketansky. Rocketansky. Jesus, what a name. I'm going to just keep calling him Max. My boy Max. Max Mofo. What if it was Max? A mad Max Mofo, and it's about Filthy Frank. Who's that joke for? It's you know what I mean? And iDubbbz, right? What if they were the warlords? I don't know. Well, I mean, I think this movie come out while Filthy Frank was still a thing? This is such a stupid. It's a stupid tangent, but it's ridiculous that Filthy Frank got away with becoming Joji. You know what I mean? Like, he completely clean split, holds zero baggage from that part of his life, to a point that I think it's ridiculous. Like, it is unbelievable that he was able to accomplish that. Genuinely unbelievable. And that's fine. I mean, whatever, but it's so funny. It's so funny to me. Anyways, so the character that is the sort of Mad Max foil, who also he's a foil to several characters, in that he's kind of the idea of the movie is really about the villain. This is a movie that is very villain driven, not necessarily protagonist driven. Because again, we know what's happening with Furiosa, and she's compelling, she's fun, she's cool, all this stuff. That's great. And Furiosa, and I think Anya Taylor-Joy does a great job. I kind of like her more as Furiosa than Charlize. Just throwing that out there. That might be a pretty spicy take with, Mad Max heads, but I like Anya Taylor-Joy better. And I'm not like a huge Anya Taylor-Joy head in general, but I like her better as the character in this movie. I also just like this movie more, so maybe that's part of it too. I am stalling, trying to do a big grand reveal, and I'm talking for 13 minutes here about about the main point of the movie, without actually saying what the main point is. Though I'm sure if you're paying attention, a thing or two. I'm talking about Chris Hemsworth's Dementis, the warlord who kidnaps Furiosa from the Green Place. Although kind of his guys kidnap Furiosa from the Green Place, and he sort of adopts her against her will as his daughter, which is he's weird. He's a very interesting, I would say, complicated character that I think does a lot. There's a lot going on with Dementis in a way that I did not find a lot going on, and I sort of alluded to this in the last episode. Did not find a lot going on with, say, Immortan Joe or People Eater, just guys who were bad, and they're bad. They're bad, that's great. They're awful, it sucks. Who gives a shit? But, there's, there's a, there's, you get to see these characters in Fury Road, right? Just in this one snapshot in time. But Furiosa takes place over the course of like a good amount of time, right? Because you start with Furiosa as a kid, and eventually she is like presumably some kind of adult. She's maybe 18, maybe I don't know how old she's supposed to be by the end of the film, but she's she's not a child. She is from child to adult. A significant amount of time has passed in the world of Mad Max during the movie. And the character, you spend maybe 10 minutes in the beginning of the movie, 10, 15 minutes with Furiosa getting kidnapped by some biker guys. And the biker guys eventually report to Chris Hemsworth's Dementis. And Dementis comes off initially like a pretty nice guy. Compared to Immortan Joe, right? I think Immortan Joe from Fury Road, you are very much supposed to not like him the entire movie. Like, he sucks. He's a bad guy. It's very clear that he's a tyrant. He's bad to, his wives, keeping him imprisoned. He's bad. He's a bad guy. He's creepy. He's bad. He's got a whole death cult thing going on. He's not a good guy, right? And so the biker horde that Dementus commands seem to like him. You know, they seem to respect him as a leader in the beginning of the film. He's kind of got, I would say, a Jesus-like vibe. He is in many ways kind of a Christ-like figure. You know, like I'm kind of joking, but like also I think that it is sort of text to make him look maybe not like Jesus, but like kind of a Messiah figure when you first meet him. Like he seems like not that bad. He's pretty, you know, as nice as he can be to Furiosa. You know, Furiosa's brought to him. He's like, hey, you know, tell me where you're from and we'll send you back. Obviously with the intention of like raiding the green place for what it's worth, or at least presumably killing off everyone there and setting up shop. That's probably worst case scenario. Best case scenario, probably trying to absorb. And based on how Dementus usually operates, I think this is what he would actually do is say, hey, we're going to take over this place. You can join us. Or like, you know, if you resist, you die. But you can join us and we can just all hang out here. And that would probably go very poorly. But I think that would have been I don't think Chris Hemsworth's character, I don't think Dementus is actively trying to like he wants to win. He doesn't necessarily want to kill people. And there's you know, reason to believe that in the text of the film. But he's more concerned about winning and expanding than he is about just killing people and conquering in war. Now he wins and expands by killing people and conquering in war, but I don't think that's like his prefer mode. He's much more trying to make a deal. He's trying to pull a fast one and be sneaky. He doesn't want to actually. He doesn't seem like as much of a fighter. He's definitely kind of a coward as a character later on in the movie. But the beginning of the movie, he's nice. He said, "Hey, we'll take care of you. I'm gonna make sure none of these like creepo dudes like do anything weird to you." Like again, compared to somebody like Immortan Joe, who would be at least that's your context, right? Like you're going into this going, well, this guy's a warlord, but from the jump, he's not a good guy, but he could be much, much worse, and we've seen much worse with Immortan Joe and his gang of warlords from Fury Road. Um, it's like you laugh to yourself, you know what I mean? It's fun. It's fun having a laugh. And that's why I love podcasting so much, is that we love having a laugh. And sorry I don't have paper this week. This is all off the dome. I didn't take notes. I didn't need to take notes. Seen this movie twice this year, which is all you need. Honestly, I want to see it again. I really like this movie. So again, please watch Furiosa. For the love of God, please watch Furiosa. It's a great time. Again, and just Chris Hemsworth is excellent. He is by far the star of the show. His character is arguably the only reason the movie exists. Please see the movie. It's great. It really shouldn't have bombed. It was great to see in theaters. Saw in 4K at home. Still very nice. Great movie. Great movie. I think it's better than Fury Road, which, I think they appeal to probably different tastes. But anyway, we still have so much more to discuss. I'm just saying, as a mid-episode kind of, you're still here. Let's see the movie, right? Let's see the movie. So back to Dementus and the plot of the movie, just to kind of try and recap and sort of hit the beats from the Dementus perspective, because I think the Furiosa perspective, not that it's not important, but it's not really what the movie is about. And especially because we know, again, you saw Fury Road probably. You know where she ends up. You know the whole movie you're waiting for her arm to get chopped off. You know what I mean? You're waiting. At one point while she's captured by Dementus, she like tattoos this star map to her arm, the one that gets that is a prosthetic in Fury Road, and you're like, oh shit, like you're just waiting for that arm to go away, right? And we'll get there, but you're waiting for the arm to go away, and the whole time Dementus, he still takes care of Furiosa. Like he's still a bad guy. He's still murdering and stuff, or at least encouraging it. He's very silly and in a charismatic kind of chaotic way. But he's still very protective of Furiosa. At one point they get to the Citadel. he finds there's like a paint flare kind of thing, and he adorns himself in red. He becomes Dementus, or the Red Dementus. There we go. And immediately goes into the Citadel from that in Morton Joe, where we're familiar with the Citadel, Morton Joe's little kingdom, and he says, "Hey, man." He speaks to the crowd and says, "Hey, like, these guys are tyrants. They're keeping the food and water from you, and under my rule, everyone's can have everything," which is very like anarcho-communist kind of vibes that I have a feeling that George Miller thinks. Sorry, George M. Isn't that right, Zach? George M. Thinks not too highly of that, or rather, I think Dementus is very much a populist and just kind of says whatever and doesn't really believe in probably what he's saying, other than as a means to an end of winning, because he's about winning and getting more. It's a key feature of his character, and that doesn't go well. But after he announces, "Hey, we're gonna try and take over the Citadel and get your people to overthrow you," and Morton Joe like gets one of the war boys to just kill himself just for fun, and Dementus is like, "Well, I don't want to deal with that," and then fights break out amongst the peasants who live on the ground, and Furiosa is almost captured, right? She's almost captured, but Dementus goes out of his way into harm's way, right, to protect her. Because again, I do genuinely think he's a character who he says early on, he lost his wife and kids, and so he still holds on to their teddy bear, and he holds on to this fucking teddy bear the whole goddamn movie, and he goes and gets her, and it's kind of sweet. It's almost immediately undermined. Later he cleverly takes down Gastown by not himself, but he's able to overrun it very easily through a little bit of trickery. He stages an attack on his own men, and then literally just attacks his own men to sell it, which some of his men say, "Hey, that's not very cool." I'm saying, "Hey, he's pawns get played, right?" Pawns get played, and he's a bad leader, but he's a good tactician. Bad long-term strategist, bad leader, good tactician. Which again, like there's so many things to say about the character, and it blows my mind that some people are like, I read a Reddit post that's like Dementus was too chaotic, and he didn't have any clear goals. And I'm like, no, his goals were very clear. They're simple goals, right? I mean, arguably maybe just as simple as Immortan Joe's, which is just legacy, right? He's building something. He wants to propel his legacy by having children that are not mutant freaks. That's his goal, and so that getting his wives back is a pretty basic, easy goal. But Dementus just wants to distract himself from, I think, the grief of losing his family, because I don't think he ever gets over it. Through the whole movie, he holds on to that teddy bear the whole movie, and it really eats at him. And by the end of the movie, he's like basically every time he changes his name, right? He goes from just Dementus to the Red Dementus, then the Great Dementus, and then the Black Dementus. Every time he gets a little worse. He's a little screwier. But he takes over Gastown, and through some trickery, and goes back to the Citadel and says, "Hey, we're gonna formally make me the Gastown Lord. I'm gonna kill off the old Gastown guy. I'm gonna be the Lord of Gastown. You recognize me and you give me more stuff." And Immortan Joe's like, "I'll give you more stuff, but give me a character that that exists in the sequel, and give me Furiosa." And Chris Hemsworth is a little upset about it. He's like, "Furiosa's my daughter." And Furiosa's like, "No, I'm not. He killed my mom." And Dementus is like, "Well, all right, fuck you." And he takes the teddy bear back from her, and he storms off. And then we don't hear from him for a while, at that point in the movie, right? Because then we spend a little bit more time with Furiosa herself, kind of figuring out how we get there. Eventually, Furiosa ends up at Gastown, and we see that Dementus has just run the place into the ground. He's not doing well. He doesn't really, he's doing a job. He's having a bad time. He's the kind of guy who's really good at conquering and really bad at ruling. And it's funny. He's just so funny. The character is so funny. Everything that comes out of his mouth is hilarious. Chris Hemsworth has this funny prosthetic nose, and he has like fake teeth and this goofy beard and hair. He's just a very goofy, silly character, and it's like it's hard not to just like the guy. He's really likable, which I think works with the film because he has followers despite being not a good leader. He's got a lot of followers despite not being a good leader, and he's very capable of mobilizing them and getting them to do what he wants, and despite ultimately being probably bad for them in the long run. But he's like this, gas down, he runs it into the ground, then off screen takes over Bullet Farm just because he can take over things, but he can't, he can't hold them down. And he does that kind of as a ploy to try and then trick the Citadel faction to try and go after him in Gastown. He wages a war with Citadel for 40 days, which I imagine in the world of Mad Max is a very long time given the limited resources, and that it's like, yeah, they have guns, but I imagine a lot of it's like just melee combat, you know what I mean? Like they're or hitting each other with cars and bikes and shit. And he manages to keep that up for 40 days against the Citadel. Granted, he doesn't really do anything to the Citadel. He probably just wastes their resources, but it's crazy that he was able to do it for that long. And he ultimately scurries off, and Furiosa chases him, tracks him down, and, and eventually kills him. But he has some good moments at the end of the movie. Oh yeah, I forgot the part where I guess after catching, he takes over Bullet Farm, he catches Furiosa and her buddy Praetorian Jack, and he tortures them, he kills Praetorian Jack. This is where Furiosa loses her arm. And then Furiosa gets her revenge. And so, I'm kind of hyping Dementis up, but really everything bad that has happened to Furiosa in the movie so far is almost entirely his fault. And whereas, like, she's very content to work for Immortan Joe, like, I guess part of the movie when I went into it the first time was expecting her to, like, I don't know why, but it was like, I was expecting, like, her and Dementis to team up against Immortan Joe and, like, fail, which maybe is, I think, a stupid thing to have expected, and retrospectively, that was dumb. But that's kind of what I was expecting. And basically, she once she's traded over to Immortan Joe, when Chris Hemsworth formally acquires Gastown, Immortan Joe leaves her alone and is pretty fair and equitable. Like, it's so weird. It's so weird watching the movie, and like Immortan Joe comes off as like fairly reasonable. I mean, granted, the point of comparison is Dementis, who is a fool and bad at ruling. But like Immortan Joe comes off as pretty reasonable, and so it is weird tonally to like hate the guy from Fury Road for very justifiable reasons, and he's like just kind of like there, and like he's still bad but in like a pretty off screen sort of, like the vibes are icky and he seems kind of mean, but like he is respectful of Furiosa, I guess, for her strength, even though you again know how bad he is with women in the first movie, and it like almost doesn't make sense. Like even in Fury Road, I think one of my things was like, well, how is Furiosa like one of his best guys, or I guess girls, but you know what I mean, like best general war people. And, the movie doesn't really do anything to explain that other than she gets rid of Dementis. And Dementis at best seemed like kind of a nuisance, like a nuisance that needed to be taken care of, that needed to be dealt with, but a nuisance. He's he's a waste of resources and he's annoying, but he can't really do anything that bad. I mean, he did take over two towns single-handedly. I mean, not single-handedly, but like, with his gang, he takes over two towns and is kind of like an existential threat in that he's just so bad at his job that he causes problems. Like if Dementus could just run Gastown normally, it would have been fine. There wouldn't have been a movie, but anyway. But it's just funny that Immortan Joe is just so whatever, and like it seems like it's like I go back and forth, right? It's like, well, he's clearly worse than Dementus, I think, because Dementus does seem to care about other people somewhat. Like he does seem to care about Furiosa in not necessarily a healthy way, in a very toxic way, but he sees her as, especially at the end of the movie, he goes on a monologue. And I'll try and not talk about the very end of the movie too much because I think that's kind of where all this ties together. And Dementus has some good monologuing at the end, which I think is really fun. And of course, well, I'm not going to say how it really ends, right? I'm not going to say how the movie really ends because that might surprise some of you, but it's not important. But he does seem to care about Furiosa, even though it might be as somebody who he sees as similar, someone who's lost everything, and they can have a kinship. Like they're similar. They're similar people, right? But I think the issue, at least not the issue with the movie, but the issue with Dementus's logic is, of course, he's the one who did all the bad stuff to Furiosa. Like he's the reason why her life is terrible. And so her revenge is very personal. He ruined it at the beginning. He ruined it, at the middle. She lost her damn arm, for God's sakes, And so her revenge is very personal. And Anya Taylor-Joy, I think, does a really good job at the ending as well, capturing that personal vengeance and that anger. But I mean, goddamn, Chris Hemsworth. I mean, I think I talk about Oscar nods on this podcast, like kind of as a joke, where especially talking about old movies, but I'll be like, oh, tip of the hat to Brendan Fraser in frickin' Bedazzled, right? I'm gonna do that, but unironically right now. I think tip of the hat. I don't know if it'll be supporting or lead, but I do think Chris Hemsworth should get some kind of nomination for this movie, at least so far this year. Of what I've seen, it is one of the best performances. It's very incredibly compelling and nuanced, and like it's so nuanced because the character's so goofy and silly. Like he's very on text, supposed to be funny and humorous, but like he's so sad, right? And I guess is he a poor little meow meow? Is that why Rick Real likes Dementus? Is because he's literally me? Yeah, I mean that's 30 minutes later. Yeah, that's basically it. And that's fine, you know. But like, I guess the difference between other poor little meow meows, and we've talked about some poor little meow meows on the cast before. I mean, Ryan Gosling in La La Land or Leo in Inception are kind of poor little meow meow characters as well. But Dementus in this is, I think, the rare like villain example where it's like you hate him for what he did to Furiosa because you still are rooting for Furiosa. She is the protagonist, and you like her. You like her from Fury Road, right? But you see like why, like as an audience member, I think it's very deliberate that he is funny. Like in the text of the movie, he's funny. He like quips, but he's like quipping in universe, and it's texture to the character, not just like quipping for the sake of quipping. And I think even saying, "Oh, he quips," I think people are going to be like, "Ew, that's why this movie sucked. That's why this movie didn't do well in theaters." And no, it didn't do well in theaters because I think you hate women, right? Like, I think that's why it didn't do well in theaters. Is because he saw it as like, "Oh, a movie prequel about a girl." Pass. Like, really, that's why I think. I'm 30 minutes into the episode. I can just say that now without controversy. And some people would say some things about that, and they'd be wrong. And I'm not going to say who, but those who are in the loop know what I'm talking about. But where was I going with that? Right, we were talking about that's why people didn't see it is because of women, and they hate women, and they didn't see it because it was a female prequel. What was I talking about before that? Frickin' A, man. Dementis. It all comes back to Dementis and how he's hashtag literally me. No, but he's a poor little meow meow that's a villain, right? And so you see, why he became the way he was, and you see him like visibly get worse mentally over the film because like he seems to be deep down a guy who he's clearly not cut out to be a warlord. He's not cut out to like live in the post apocalypse. Like he seems probably like a pretty normal dude who lost everything and just kind of lost it. He very much lost it, and it keeps getting mentally worse as things get worse for him. And like everything that goes wrong in the movie is his own fault, either to him or to somebody else. Like it's all his fault because he's bad at being a leader and he's bad at making long term plays. And by the end of the movie, like he's I mean, arguably throughout the whole movie, he's ready to die. He just doesn't give a shit. He's done, Um, but in a lot of ways, as a character, I mean, with background stuff and visual motifs as well, he's a kind of a mirror to Max himself. That's why I said in the beginning of the episode, the beginning of the podcast, that you know the movie's more about Mad Max because Mad Dementis is kind of like a what if Mad Max character, right? And I don't like back to the point of the movie, right? Because people don't see it because it's about Furiosa because they're sexist and they hate women. And they didn't want to see a prequel about a character they kind of already got enough of, right? Um, what would you name it? And it's like I don't know, but like I think if you sell it like it's a story about a villain through the perspective of a protagonist that we already know. And also it happens to like explain it also happens to be an origin story, but it's rather incidental. That's really what Furiosa, a Mad Max saga is. It's an incidental origin story while doing this like character study with Dementis. Because again, Furiosa gets her revenge story, and there's bookend moments with the film, and it is a complete arc. But again, it's a complete arc within the context of what we're getting later, or I guess before in our time, but later in the timeline of the film, right? With Fury Road. But Dementis, when he's on screen, the movie is about him, and he's probably on screen a lot. Like I remember seeing, that his name was, the second billing right on the poster, right? I mean, it's honestly Anya Taylor-Joy and Chris Hemsworth are like right next to each other. So I guess he would be a lead. He would get a tip of the hat, for lead actor on this from the Oscars. I think Mr. Oscar will shine his light onto Chris Hemsworth for this. But I think how do I wrap this up, right? How do I wrap this up? I guess for the people who've already seen it, they already know what I'm saying to be true and real. But for the people who haven't seen Furiosa, who are still listening to this, I would seriously just recommend going into this as you're learning about a completely new character, and that's who the movie's about. And occasionally, you take breaks from him to hang out with a character you already know and like. And I think that way, the movie's fine. It's like it's the rise and fall of Dementis. That's the movie. And maybe it could have been called that, and maybe people, and then say a Mad Max saga, and people would go, okay. And maybe that something like that was originally the title. Like I do not believe, and even if George M himself told me that I'm wrong, I don't know if I would believe him. But I don't believe he envisioned this movie with the sole goal of it being about Furiosa, the character. I think he wanted to do a prequel, and that's how this was like kind of the exploring it with Furiosa, the character, was sort of the path of least resistance. And then, okay, so you have this story. Who's her villain? Because it can't be Immortan Joe, because one, he's alive. Two, she is working for him. So he can't be that much of a villain. So you make one up, right? And it has to be a new guy. Well, what do you make up? You make up a guy who probably would be similar to both Furiosa herself. Make him interestingly contrast with Immortan Joe, because it's just a different Immortan Joe. That's not very interesting. And then I think there's something interesting to play around with with as a foil, as a dark reflection of Max himself. And I think, again, in that context, very interesting character in a great movie. I think I gave it like a 4 or 4.5 on Letterboxd. I think I would move it up to a 5. And I don't give out fives charitably on Letterboxd. 5 and a like, of course, but it's a great film. Seriously, please see it. It's on HBO Max. Like, there's no reason not to see it. So please see it. With that, I've hit the 40-minute mark. I think I've sung its praises enough. Again, reach out if you have anything to reach out about, please email me at rick.real.badboycinema@gmail.com. Leave a review on your favorite podcast app. Give us 5 stars. And by us, I mean me. This is still a one man show, and in many ways, the final confrontation between Dementis and Furiosa is not dissimilar to who's to say who is who, but maybe the host of the show and a former special guest host at this point of this show. Who's to say? Not me. But with that, thank you for tuning in. Thank you for listening. I think next week's episode will be some weeb shit. I'll be watching. I guess Kizu Monogatari, Koyomi Vamp, which is a re-edit of the 3 Kizu Monogatari films into a single movie. I think it's out in theaters. I'm recording this on 8/26. I believe it's out 8/28. And I think it's a 1 day only thing, but I will do a review on that because I like that franchise, and I'm gonna record it early because I will be gone on Labor Day, so I won't be able to record anything then. But you will still get an episode. You might not be one you like or about anything you care about, but you will listen. I trust that you'll do that for me, your close personal friend, Rick Real. And with that, again, thanks for tuning in. Thanks for listening. And we'll see you next time.